It all began with the little things, the kinds of details most people might dismiss. But when you've lived with someone for years, you learn their rhythms, their patterns, the way their stories usually line up. My husband had always been careful with his words, never too vague and never too detailed, but suddenly I noticed changes. His phone became glued to his hand, like a lifeline he couldn't let out of his sight, and when it buzzed, his eyes darted away before mine could catch a glimpse of the screen. At first, I brushed it off as stress, maybe something at work, because he often carried the weight of his job into our home. But then came the late nights, the sudden meetings that had never existed before, and the subtle perfume that wasn't mine lingering faintly on his clothes. I remember one evening in particular when he returned home far later than he promised. He had told me he was stuck in traffic, yet I knew the route he took, and I had checked the updates on the road that day. There hadn't been a single accident, no delays, just the usual flow. He stumbled over his words when I asked, giving me a half smile as if that could plaster over the cracks. I didn't push further in that moment, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was the quiet certainty that a puzzle was forming, and I needed to start connecting the pieces. The emails were the next clue. He left his laptop open once, something he rarely did, and though nothing explicit appeared, I noticed travel confirmations tucked between the lines. A resort booking under his name, dates that coincided with one of his supposed conferences, and an itinerary that didn't mention the city he claimed he would be in. My heart pounded as I scrolled, a mixture of dread and adrenaline, because there it was, evidence that his truth and my reality weren't the same anymore. The confirmation email carried the name of a beachside getaway, one we had once spoken about as a dream destination. Except this time, I wasn't invited. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I decided to watch carefully. His conversations became more guarded, his explanations rehearsed, as if he were reading from a script. He packed a suitcase in silence, folding clothes meticulously, avoiding eye contact as though the weight of his secret might spill out if he looked at me too long. He left early the next morning with a hurried kiss, one that lacked warmth, and for the first time, I didn't ask a single question. He thought he was leaving me behind, but I had already begun planning my own move. The suspicion became undeniable when I matched his lies with the small, overlooked traces he left behind. A receipt tucked in his wallet for 2 glasses of wine at a restaurant we had never visited together. A new shirt that wasn't his style but seemed chosen to impress someone else. The way his tone shifted when he spoke to colleagues on the phone, his laughter lighter, his voice softer, as if the person on the other end brought out a version of him he never showed me anymore. Each detail added fuel to the fire building inside me, not just anger, but a determination to reclaim the power he thought he had taken from me. I told myself I wasn't going to be blindsided by half-truths or broken promises. If there was a story unfolding, I wanted to step into it with my eyes wide open. So, I began making my own arrangements quietly. I studied the location, mapped out the resort, and booked my place there without a word. The irony didn't escape me. He believed he was escaping into freedom, yet I was already plotting how to meet him at the very door of his fantasy. Every moment leading up to his so-called business trip was a test of patience. I smiled when he gave me excuses, nodded when he mentioned long meetings, and let him think he was weaving a perfect cover. But all the while, I held on to the clues he had carelessly scattered, the fragments of truth hidden in receipts, in unexplained silences, in the way his eyes flickered when he lied. By the time he left, I wasn't the naive wife waiting at home. I was already packing my own suitcase, ready to meet the man I thought I knew in the place where his secrets thought they could hide. The decision to follow him didn't come lightly, but once the truth settled into my chest, there was no turning back. I had spent too many nights questioning myself, wondering if I was overthinking, if maybe the problem was me, if perhaps I had grown too suspicious and insecure. But deep down, I knew the signs were not imagined. They were real, and every unanswered question demanded a response. So instead of waiting for him to return with another fabricated story, I decided to turn the tables. If he was scripting a secret chapter of his life, I was going to walk straight into the middle of it and claim my role. I remember the day I booked my ticket. My hands trembled over the keyboard, a mix of fury and empowerment coursing through me. The destination was the same one listed on his hidden itinerary, the beachside resort glowing with glossy promises of paradise. Except this time, paradise was the backdrop for betrayal. I stared at the confirmation screen for what felt like hours, my heart racing at the thought of what I was about to do. I wasn't just going to spy on him, I was going to step into his illusion and remind him that no matter how carefully he tried to erase me from this story, I was still very much here. Packing my bags felt different this time. Usually, when we traveled together, there was laughter and anticipation, the excited back and forth of what to bring and what to leave behind. But now the silence was heavy, deliberate. I folded each piece of clothing with intention, choosing outfits not for comfort but for impact. I wanted to be seen, to remind him with every glance that I was not the woman to be dismissed or forgotten. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I felt a strange calmness wash over me, as though reclaiming my place in this story was giving me back a part of myself I had lost in the shadows of his lies. The journey to the airport was surreal. He had left 2 days earlier, convinced that I was at home, unsuspecting. I imagined him sipping cocktails, laughing with her, thinking he had outsmarted me. The thought stung, but it also fueled me. I kept my head high, moving through security, boarding the plane, feeling the weight of the secret I carried. No one around me knew that I wasn't traveling for leisure, but for confrontation, for truth, for closure. The hum of the engines as we took off felt like the beginning of a storm, and I was flying straight into it. When I landed, the air smelled of salt and sun, the kind of place built for romance and escape. Tourists walked past me with smiles, couples held hands, families snapped photos, and I stood there quietly, a woman on a mission no one could see. I made my way to the resort, my heart pounding harder with every step. The entrance was grand, the kind of place that whispered luxury, where secrets could be easily disguised under the glow of candlelight dinners and moonlit walks on the sand. But this time, one secret was about to be exposed. Checking in felt almost theatrical. The receptionist greeted me warmly, unaware of the storm I was bringing with me. I gave my name, smiled politely, and received the keycard to a room not far from his. I had chosen it deliberately, booking myself into the same world he thought was hidden from me. As I walked down the hallway, suitcase rolling behind me, I could almost hear the echo of my own determination. This wasn't just about catching him in the act, it was about standing in the space he had tried to erase me from and showing him I was still here, unshaken. Inside the room, I set my bag down and stood by the window, staring out at the ocean. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, as if mocking the turbulence inside me. I thought about the years we had spent together, the promises made, the trust built, and how easily he had thrown it all away for a fleeting fantasy. Yet here I was, taking control of the moment, deciding that if he wanted to live a double life, I would no longer be the woman left behind in the shadows. I would be the one to step into the light and shatter his illusion. The hours ticked by slowly, each one bringing me closer to the inevitable confrontation. I rehearsed in my head what I would say, how I would look at him when he finally saw me standing there. Would he be shocked, guilty, defensive? Would he crumble under the weight of his own lies, or would he try to spin yet another story? I didn't know, but what I did know was that I was no longer powerless. I had walked into the story he had tried to write without me, and I was ready to take back the pen the moment I arrived before him was surreal, like stepping onto a stage while the audience is still settling into their seats, unaware that the main act has already begun. I had carefully timed everything, calculated the travel hours, and even anticipated the delay in his flight. He thought he was orchestrating a secret escape, but the truth was, I had already claimed my spot at the center of the story. Walking into the resort, I felt a strange combination of adrenaline and serenity. The anticipation was like electricity in the air, every step carrying me closer to the confrontation I had been planning in silence. I had rehearsed the possibilities in my mind countless times, imagining his surprise, the moment his confident smile would falter when he realized I was already there, waiting not as a victim, but as a witness and as someone in command of the narrative. Checking into my room, I deliberately chose one with a view of the main courtyard, a vantage point where I could see any unexpected arrivals, the movement of guests, and most importantly, the approach of the man who had tried to keep me out of his life for a few stolen days. As I unpacked my suitcase, my hands worked mechanically, each action grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't just about revenge or anger, it was about reclaiming my power. I arranged my things neatly, ensuring the room reflected the composure I felt inside, a stark contrast to the chaos that had brought me here. Every fold of clothing, every careful placement of personal items was a statement that I was present, deliberate, and unshakable. Sitting by the balcony, I watched the waves crash against the shore, the sunlight glinting on the water in a way that seemed almost cinematic. The resort was alive with the hum of tourists, laughter echoing from nearby tables, children playing in the pool, couples holding hands as if the world belonged only to them. It was a perfect stage for deception, yet here I was, occupying the same world he believed he had hidden from me. Every detail of the environment, the soft glow of the lanterns lining the paths, the rustle of palm leaves in the wind, the distant sound of music from a beachside bar felt amplified by my heightened awareness. I was attuned to everything, every movement, every sound, because this moment wasn't just a simple confrontation, it was the culmination of months of observation, suspicion, and quiet preparation. The hours before his arrival were a strange mix of tension and reflection. I thought about how he must have felt when he realized he had underestimated me, the shock that would ripple through him when he saw me standing there. I imagined his confidence turning to confusion, his plans unraveling in real time as he tried to navigate the presence of the one person he assumed would be absent. And yet, as much as I anticipated the scene, I also allowed myself to reflect on the years we had spent together, the good, the bad, the moments that had built the life we shared. There was a sadness underlying my resolve, a recognition that betrayal cuts deeper than anger, but it was tempered by the clarity that I was no longer passive in my own story. When I finally glimpsed him from the courtyard, my heart skipped, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. He was unaware, moving confidently toward what he believed was a private sanctuary, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the illusion of privacy was about to shatter. The weight of his arrogance, the smugness in his stride, became almost tangible, and I realized how much power had shifted without a single word spoken. I didn't need to rush, didn't need to announce my presence immediately, because every step he took unknowingly toward me amplified the eventual impact. The anticipation of that first interaction was a lesson in patience and strategy. I observed him, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor, the slight hesitation that appeared when he sensed something amiss, but couldn't quite identify it. I had studied the resort layout, memorized the paths he would take, and even anticipated his interactions with staff and other guests. It was like watching a play in which I knew every line, every cue, and every dramatic pause. I allowed the tension to build, knowing that when the moment came, it would carry a weight far greater than any immediate confrontation could achieve. Time stretched, and yet each second brought me closer to the inevitable meeting. I remained composed, breathing in the salt air, letting the sun warm my skin, and reminding myself that I was not a passive observer, but an active participant. The balance of power had shifted, and when he finally looked up and saw me, I would not be the person he expected. The anticipation was intoxicating, a mix of justice and revelation, because I had entered his world before he could even imagine it, claiming my presence, my voice, and my truth. The emotions that hit me when I saw him were raw and complicated, like a storm with no warning, yet contained in a single heartbeat. Anger surged first, sharp and hot, the kind that made my fists clench and my chest tighten. I had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsing my words, my expressions, the look I would give him, and yet, When the reality arrived, it was more intense than anything I could have anticipated. The betrayal was palpable, hanging in the air between us like a thick fog, but beneath the anger, there was something else, an unexpected calmness that steadied me, reminding me that I was no longer the woman who would crumble or beg for explanations. I was standing in my own power, in a space I had claimed deliberately, and for the first time, I understood that confronting him wasn't about revenge, it was about asserting my truth. Every detail of that first confrontation was vivid in my mind, and I replayed it endlessly in the hours leading up to it. I noticed how his shoulders stiffened, the slight shift in his gaze, the tiny tremor in his confident posture that betrayed his inner panic. He had thought he could control this scenario, but now the control had shifted. The balance tipped in my favor simply because I had arrived first, because I had stepped into his carefully constructed narrative and altered its course. I studied his face, memorizing the way his eyes darted nervously, the hesitation in his smile, and the subtle quiver in his voice as he finally realized that I was not a bystander to his secrets. The confrontation itself was a delicate dance, a mix of restraint and intensity. I chose my words carefully, each one deliberate, slicing through the fog of his lies with precision. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse wildly, because the power was in my composure, in the quiet assertion that I knew everything and was no longer willing to accept deception. The way I spoke, the calmness that underlined every sentence, made him falter in ways no anger could have achieved. He tried to explain, to justify, to twist the narrative back to his favor, but each excuse fell flat against the weight of the truth I had gathered, the evidence I carried silently with me. I could see the panic building in his eyes, the sudden awareness that he had underestimated me, and that realization alone carried a satisfaction I had never anticipated. I also noticed the subtle dynamics of the environment around us. The resort, the setting for his secret indulgence, suddenly felt transformed into a stage for accountability. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the glow of lanterns flickering against the gentle ocean breeze. Guests passed by, unaware of the personal storm unfolding in their midst, yet every detail, the sound of distant laughter, the rustling leaves, the soft waves lapping against the shore, seemed to echo the tension between us. The beauty of the location, once a backdrop for betrayal, became a mirror for my clarity and resolve. I felt grounded in the moment, anchored not by revenge, but by the certainty that I was reclaiming my own narrative, rewriting the story he had attempted to script without me. There was also a profound sense of self-awareness in that confrontation, a recognition that while the pain of betrayal was undeniable, the moment was not about humiliation or punishment. It was about presence, about the ability to assert boundaries and reclaim dignity. I realized that the calmness I felt was not weakness, but strength, and that the rawness of my emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief, was valid, but secondary to the power I carried simply by being there, by refusing to be sidelined in my own life. The clarity was almost liberating, a reminder that even in the face of deceit, one could remain composed, intelligent, and resolute. Throughout the exchange, I observed every flicker of expression, every micro-reaction, knowing that each revealed more than words ever could. His attempts to regain composure, to redirect blame, to appeal to sympathy, all failed because they collided with the immovable truth I represented. I had entered the story he thought he could control, and by existing in it fully, deliberately, I had claimed a victory that no argument could diminish. The intensity of the emotions, the calculated calm, and the undeniable presence I projected created a moment that would not be forgotten easily, a turning point in a narrative that had long been overshadowed by secrecy and deceit. I realized then that confrontation was not about tearing someone down, but about standing fully, entirely, and unapologetically in your own reality and showing the world, and those who try to manipulate it, that your truth cannot be ignored. The confrontation transformed quickly from a private reckoning into a spectacle of truth, not because I wanted it to be public, but because the intensity of the moment demanded visibility. He had always assumed that deception could exist in a bubble, a carefully curated world separate from reality, but the moment I stepped in, that bubble burst. I watched him as he realized that nothing was hidden anymore, that the sanctuary he thought he had constructed for secrecy was now penetrated by the presence of someone who refused to be sidelined. There was a tension in the air so thick it felt almost tangible, like electricity before a storm, and it was as if time slowed, each heartbeat echoing louder, each second stretching longer as the reality of exposure settled in. I observed the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his confident posture wavered, how the corners of his mouth twitched with uncertainty, and the involuntary movements of his hands betraying the inner panic he tried desperately to conceal. He had relied on his charm, on rehearsed excuses and a polished mask, but that mask began to crack the moment he realized I had anticipated everything. Every lie he had constructed, every meticulous plan of deception, collapsed in the presence of my awareness. I felt a strange sense of justice, a satisfaction that had nothing to do with vengeance, but everything to do with reclaiming the space that had been silently stolen from me. The power was no longer his. It had shifted simply because I refused to be absent, because I chose to step into a narrative that was never meant to exclude me. The environment itself played a role in magnifying the moment. The resort, designed for leisure and pleasure, suddenly became a stage for revelation. The gentle hum of guests, the distant laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, even the waves breaking rhythmically on the shore, all seemed amplified in their contrast to the charged tension between us. It was a striking reminder that life often continues around moments of personal upheaval, indifferent to the storms within, and that truth, once brought into the open, cannot be contained. Every glance from him, every falter in his composure, was a confirmation that his private paradise had been penetrated, and the real power in that space now belonged to me. There was also an undeniable clarity in witnessing his reactions. I noticed the subtle twitch in his jaw, the quick blink of his eyes, the tiny shift in the way he carried himself as he processed my presence. Each movement told a story he could no longer control, each expression a silent confession that the secret he had guarded so carefully was no longer his alone. I realized then that confrontation was not merely about voicing the truth. It was about presence, about embodying awareness in a way that leaves no room for deceit. By simply being there, calm yet resolute, I transformed the dynamic, demonstrating that awareness and intention can wield a power far beyond anger or accusation. Even as the confrontation unfolded, there was a strange mixture of emotions running through me: sadness, because trust had been broken, but also relief, because the truth was finally unmasked, anger, because of the betrayal, but tempered by the steady resolve that I had gained through preparation and observation. I understood that the satisfaction I felt was not about humiliating him, but about reclaiming agency, taking back control of a narrative that had been slipping through my fingers. Every word I spoke, every measured glance I gave, reinforced the unspoken message. I would no longer be invisible in the story of my own life, and no attempt to manipulate or conceal could remove me from that reality. The way the moment unfolded highlighted the intricate balance between restraint and impact. I did not need to shout, to accuse, or to enact revenge, because the quiet certainty of my presence was enough. His attempts to redirect, to explain, to appeal to reason or sympathy, all fell flat because the truth I represented could not be obscured. I had anticipated his reactions, yet even that foresight could not fully prepare me for the gravity of watching him confront his own vulnerability in real time. It was a masterclass in the power of presence, in the strength of anticipation and preparation, and in the realization that sometimes control lies not in what we say, but in the way we exist in moments that demand truth. Through it all, I felt a profound shift within myself. The confrontation had moved beyond anger or betrayal. It had become a lesson in presence, in reclaiming agency, and in asserting boundaries that could not be crossed. I understood that power does not always need to be loud or violent. It can simply be inherent in the act of standing firm, of occupying the space that is rightfully yours, and of allowing truth to reveal itself in its own uncompromising way. The lesson I walked away with was neither simple nor easy, but it was undeniable, carved into my mind with the clarity that only lived experience can provide. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, the suspicion, the planning, the silent journey, the confrontation, and the raw emotional intensity, I realized that the story was no longer about him, or the betrayal, or the secrecy that had once dominated our lives. It was about me, and the power I discovered in reclaiming my own narrative, in stepping into spaces that were once denied, and in refusing to be sidelined by deception or fear. There was a strength in understanding that truth, once claimed, cannot be ignored, and that the courage to face it head-on is transformative in ways that linger long after the moment has passed. I had always believed in patience and trust, that honesty and love would carry relationships through difficulties, but this experience showed me the limits of those ideals when confronted with deliberate betrayal. It was not simply a matter of anger or revenge. It was about awareness, about learning to recognize the subtle cues that signal dishonesty, and about acting with intention when those signals cannot be dismissed. The clues had been there all along: the unexplained absences, the rehearsed stories, the hidden receipts, and the slight shifts in behavior that seemed insignificant in isolation, but, when viewed together, formed a map of deception. Understanding that pattern gave me the insight to take decisive action, and with that insight came empowerment. The empowerment came not from confronting him alone, but from realizing the power of foresight and preparation. By quietly observing, planning, and positioning myself to enter the scenario on my own terms, I transformed what could have been a moment of helplessness into one of control. It was a revelation to see how much influence we have when we refuse to act passively in our own lives, when we take the initiative to assert our presence even in situations where we have been deliberately excluded. That knowledge was liberating, a reminder that agency is one of the most potent forms of power, far stronger than anger, accusation, or any immediate form of retribution. Another lesson lay in the depth of emotional resilience. Facing betrayal is not simply about confronting another person. It is about confronting your own emotions, processing the shock, the hurt, and the sense of loss that accompany the discovery of deceit. I had to navigate my own fury, my heartbreak, and my disbelief while maintaining enough composure to act strategically. It was an exercise in self-discipline, in holding steady while the world around me felt chaotic, and in finding strength in the calmness that emerges when one chooses awareness over reaction. That calmness became my ally, guiding me through the confrontation with clarity and purpose, allowing me to reclaim my own dignity and sense of self. I also learned the importance of presence. The power of simply being there, unshaken, visible, and deliberate, cannot be overstated. In that moment, my presence became a statement, a force that reshaped the situation without a single raised voice or act of aggression. He had assumed invisibility, a lack of awareness on my part, but my deliberate presence undermined every attempt at secrecy. There was a profound lesson in understanding that sometimes influence and impact do not come from argument or conflict, but from standing firmly in your truth, allowing your awareness to command the space naturally and irreversibly. Finally, the experience underscored the enduring value of self-respect and boundaries. Confronting betrayal, stepping into the story he tried to write without me, and asserting my place in it was not about revenge. It was about refusing to accept diminished value, refusing to let someone else dictate the terms of my life, and reclaiming the respect I deserved. I realized that power is inextricably tied to self-worth, and that recognizing your own value is both an armor and a tool. It allows you to navigate the most challenging moments with grace, clarity, and purpose, transforming what could have been a moment of despair into one of profound personal victory. Through it all, the lesson crystallized: life does not pause for betrayal, nor does it reward silence when truth is ignored. Strength lies in awareness, preparation, emotional resilience, presence, and self-respect. The journey I undertook was as much about understanding myself as it was about confronting him, and the insight gained is a guide that shapes every choice, every boundary, and every act of courage that follows, reminding me that even in the face of deception, one can reclaim control and emerge stronger than before.